Barney Saunders. Was there ever a moment when you were in the Church of Scientology that you came across an article, in print or online, that was critical of Scientology? For example, that covered the abuses or exposed the true history of L. Ron Hubbard, and that you filtered out, quote unquote, because you were unable at that point in time to accept the facts? And what about once you had left the Church of Scientology and had started to go down the rabbit hole on the internet? Do you remember the first article you read? Did it convince you right away, or were you still skeptical of the claims made? All right, I've talked about my whole down the rabbit hole thing so many times, I'm not going to get into that a whole lot, but this question did make me think of something that I have never talked about that I thought might be interesting for you, because it was actually an important point in time, and I didn't realize at the time just how important it was. So cast your mind back to 1991. And I was a Class 5 staff member. I was a staff member at the Church of Scientology of Santa Barbara. And so I wasn't Sea Org yet. That was still 4 years away. And I was in the grocery store, and the Time magazine article came out. And this is Scientology, the Cult of Greed. And we were all like, oh my God. And we were told, don't read it, don't open it, don't look at it, because there's confidential information in there and it's totally off the rails. And why would you look at any of that stuff anyway? Well, I was curious, and I was standing in the grocery store, and I was freaking out because I wanted to look at it. I wanted that knowledge. I wanted to see it, but and I went, all these people have read it. They're still around. Nobody's dying, so I want to see what's in this thing, right? So I opened the article, and I read it, and I read it all, and I was actually freaking out, though, because there was one 2-page spread that laid out the OT levels and what was covered, a very little brief one or two line summary of what was covered on each of the OT levels. And I was like, oh my God, I want to know, but I can't know, but I want to know, but I can't know. I mean, I was just like, racked with fear and doubt and indecision. But I finally came over it, and I looked. Now, I only looked at a couple of levels, and I was just, like I said, I was terrified. So I, kind of looked and then averted my eyes and just like, and I saw something about Xenu. And then on OT8, I distinctly remember it said something about how you come to realize that everything you've done in Scientology was an illusion or was not true, and you are just a simple little spiritual entity, or it was something like that, or somehow it communicated. I don't think it said the spiritual entity part, but I think it said the part about how you come to realize that everything you've done up to now is not real or something. So it kind of, I was taken by that, obviously, because I still remember it, and I was like, wow, that's weird. And I just thought it was weird. It was so weird, so not understandable to me that I just kind of went, well, that just can't be true, and I immediately dismissed it. And the Xenu thing I was terrified of, so I only saw that little tiny bit, and I just went, oh, nope, can't look at that. Got to be a good chicken, right? Because this stuff is dangerous, and it's going to kill me if I get too deep into this. So I spent most of my time in the article reading the testimonials of former Scientologists who were talking about how Scientologists had taken them for a ride, ripped them off of all this money. They had mortgages on their houses now that they couldn't pay because they'd given all this money to the church and they couldn't get a refund. And, those stories were not hard to read. I was a little bit like, well, they should just, I was still thinking like a Scientologist, of course. So I was thinking it was easy for me to dismiss them too, because I thought, well, those are just individual cases. Scientology overall has helped thousands of people, tens of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. So clearly these disaffected, idiots just didn't do it right. And they have their own, what we call overts. They had their own bad deeds, and that's why they were talking trash about Scientology. So I was able to dismiss all of it easily enough at the time. But that was the first time that I'd ever heard the word Xenu or saw it in print. And once you know something like that, right, you can't unknow it. And it was like that little splinter in my mind. And that was the tiniest, I'm pointing back here to my amygdala, right? Like, okay. It was the tiniest little seed. It took years and years to grow. Years. right? It was a slow process because I was all in and I was fully committed. But once it's there, don't ever underestimate the power of what you can do with even a single word. It really can work. You just have to look at the time frames involved sometimes, because sometimes people are a little slow in coming around to seeing other points of view. And so that was certainly the truth in my case. But eventually, 20 years later, I was out of there. So that's how it happened, and I thought that might be of interest to you. So there you go.